Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session, cheating with Hyperstar Astro Imaging. Dylan O'Donnell came to the rescue, and I've been asking you guys for a while, hey, if you guys have any ideas, anything you can present on, drop me a line. And my hero, Dylan O'Donnell, came through and said, cheating with Hyperstar Astro Imaging. And I thought it was funny that he said cheating with Hyperstar Imaging, because I used to tongue-in-cheek say to the Hyperstar guys, oh, well, you're cheating, you're using Hyperstar. And sure enough, he happened to use that term, and he's doing it himself. So he knows how much he's cheating. But one thing I didn't get to do was check on the image of the week, because I don't think there was a new one this week. But I just want to make sure it didn't get posted last minute. It was posted last minute. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show off this image, which is from Corey Phillips. This is cool. This is the first time I'm seeing this. Wow. Let me share my screen so I can show this guy off. There we go. Corey Phillips, Starscape in what looks like a warehouse, or a warehouse without a roof. That's interesting. Starscape with some clouds. The clouds look nice and cool because they're drifting there. Awesome image. I love these starscapes, and a fisheye lens, which just kind of makes it, everything looks cooler with a fisheye lens. But Corey, if you're out there and you want to come on and tell us a little bit about what you did next week, let me know, and we'll give you a few minutes to talk about it. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to hand it right back over to Dylan. And there we go. Dylan, the room is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, Adam. Thanks for having me on board. Someone in the chat last week said they wanted to hear about Hyperstar, so hopefully I can share a bit of what I know, which won't be definitive, but I will try my best. Can you guys hear me okay and see the slides okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. So yes, you did pick up, I called it cheating with Hyperstar, because I'm always getting ribbed by my friends about using the Hyperstar and how fast it is, and that I might be cheating. And yeah, I probably am, but you know, whatever gets the job done, hey? So about me, my name's Dylan O'Donnell. I've got a Masters of Information Technology, Celestron, and I write at celestron.com. I also write a bit at photographingspace.com. My long-running photo blog is geography.com. I also post on byronbayobservatory.com.au for all the space stuff. Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Google+, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm just an enthusiastic beginner. I have only been doing this for about 2.5 years, and after getting my first telescope and then looking around to see, you know, how I could make the next step to get into astrophotography, stumbled upon an article about Hyperstar in Australian Sky and Telescope. Kind of propelled me to go down this path. You can see a portrait there of me with my current rig, and you're probably wondering what madness is this dual wielding setup like Darth Maul from the Phantom Menace. But there's more wrong with that photo than just the dual wield. You'll see that I'm tilting my head right ascension to make the portrait look normal. The history of Hyperstar. Before Hyperstar, there was this product called Farstar, which Celestron had in the late 90s, which basically did the same thing, except it was just official on their gear. It was discontinued around the mid-2000s, and Starizona, a company from Arizona, has been manufacturing their Hyperstar lens, which essentially does the same thing since the early 2000s. So this product is very closely related to Celestron and Celestron scopes. And it's interesting that a third party has taken the baton and is doing the Hyperstar stuff now to replace the discontinued Farstar system. Dean from Starizona was nice enough to go over my slides today, so he has more or less given me his blessing to go ahead with this. I am a fan of Hyperstar, but I will go through as well with using Hyperstar, so the pros and cons. Now, if you go into Wikipedia and do a Google for, you know, what space, you'll get this list. And there are more than this. There are the infrared and the very high-tech scopes. But in the visual spectrum, this is the list of telescopes they give you. Hubble, obviously. This is all the telescopes that will give you an RGB image from space. But they are missing one. And when I saw this photo in Australian Sky Telescope, it kind of blew my mind, because I'm looking at a Celestron CC floating space station with Chris Hadfield. It was launched in 2012, and Star Arizona customized a Celestron CPC 9.25 and a Canon 7D. This mission that they have with this telescope is called ISERV, the International Space Station Environmental Research and Visualization. They take photos of the Earth with this telescope. And I wonder what the flexure is like with zero gravity. I can't imagine that he gets much camera sag up there from that telescope. It's a glacier over Chile, and it's just remarkable. We don't often think about our telescopes as being, just for regular terrestrial photography. But really, it's the same stuff. We could take our gear out to wetlands and take amazing photos of birds if we felt like it. And this image is testament to that. The ISERV mission is for taking very quick images of the Earth, because you can imagine the International Space Station is flying about really quickly. They have to shoot through a fair amount of glass through the windows and things like that. So to take a quick image in high resolution, they've chosen the Hyperstar system. And I was really blown away to see level telescope in space as well. And when I saw that, I was already sort of down the Celestron path already, but I sort of thought, if NASA is spending the money to customize telescope and send it up to the space station, well, I'm sold. Here on Earth, there's another guy who uses Hyperstar. This is Stephen Hawking with his customized 11-inch Celestron. Now, Hawking obviously doesn't have a lot of time to sit around and do astrophotography like we do, hours and hours on end. So they made this great rig for him where he could shoot really quickly. It's not an equatorial mount, but he can balcony and take really quick images of space and essentially see a live feed. You can't actually see the Hyperstar lens under there. It's under the dew shield. So I know what you're thinking. Shut up and take my money. When I saw that photo of Chris Hadfield, I was sold. And of course with Stephen Hawking as well. These guys know what they're talking about. So I may as well spend all my money on Hyperstar, right? Works. This is a dome eye view of my setup, and you can see I'm taking off the secondary mirror there and putting the Hyperstar lens on top. Then after the Hyperstar lens, I've got a little lens drawer, little filter drawer, sorry, and then the CCD camera after that. And the whole setup looks kind of kooky, right? You've seen the Hyperstar guys out there at star parties and whatnot, and they've got the stuff on the front of the telescope, which seems really counterintuitive, right? That's where all the light comes in. You don't want to block the scope, but essentially it's not really that counterintuitive at all, because that is already obstructed. You already have a secondary mirror there, which is blocking the light at the front. How it works, it's a regular Schmidt-Cassegrain. You hijack that secondary mirror and you put your Hyperstar lens and your camera up the front there. Now for my 9.25, which runs a native focal length of millimeters, with the Hyperstar we get down to 540 millimeters, which is a multiple of about 4.3. So it's an f10 scope. Dividing that by 4.3 gives you a focal, an F number of about 2.3, more or less. There's a lot of decimal numbers on there that I'm rounding off. You end up with a wider field of view, so it turns that very high mag telescope into 540 millimeter, which is not much more than a very, very good Canon lens, really. But for that sacrifice, you get a hugely fast light bucket. F2.3 is really fast, faster than what you think as well, because as that number gets smaller, the increment means more. It is similar, I guess, to a Dobsonian light path. If you can imagine at the front of the scope, there was a little mirror going off to the side and having an eyepiece on the side there. It's sort of the same as how But yeah, don't worry about the fact that there's an obstruction at the front. There always was. You focus away from that obstruction, the same way you focus away from any dust and grime on the front of your glass. It's just not, you might get a dip in the overall light, but it doesn't affect what you're looking at in the far distance. This is the most important slide in the whole presentation because of this little chart here. This is a comparison of a Hyperstar shot on the right with a non-Hyperstar shot with more or less the same gear, although different scope, to give similar fields of view. This one took 60 minutes, 12 times 5-minute frames. The Hyperstar one took 90 seconds. A lot of sense for this in this small image in the slide that you're seeing through YouTube now, but you can zoom in and arguably the Hyperstar has a bit more detail as well. It's really a nice exposure. 10, to do an exposure and get the amount of detail you get in a 12.5-minute exposure with the Hyperstar takes 30 seconds. So you can see that it's not like you're just sort of halving it. By the time you get down to f2, it's 25 times faster than f10 photographically. So that's a huge difference. It means you can do some pretty deep exposures with Hyperstar. This was my first light. I was very excited to whip it out and send it over to Orion like we all do. It was just dipping over the horizon, and I did dots, and I thought this was the bee's knees, and I was ready to send this to APOD and get published and retire. I thought this was fantastic. This was the best photo I'd ever taken. But of course, I began to learn that if you can tame Hyperstar and get more out of it and learn more about processing like we do on this channel, then there's more you can do. And there are some issues that I had to contend with as I kept going. One issue is the collimation. So there's a bunch of screws on the Hyperstar lens, and if you don't, I mean, if you put your camera on, you're always going to get some sag. Gravity is going to push it down a bit, and your chip is not going to be 100% flat with the light path. So you end up with what we've got here on the left side of this slide, side of my frame and the right side of my frame on a QHY12 CCD, and half of it's really soft. And so I was having this issue where I really had to pay attention to the collimation depending on which side of the meridian I was on and how my camera was sitting and where it was rotated to make sure that my frame was going to really be flat. And I ended up fiddling with these. I'm still fiddling with these knobs, really. The only advice I could give would be to start with it flat flush. If you can screw it down really tight, and so I think screwing it down really tight in the first place so that you have no give in any of these screws has done more for me than putting it up a bit and then trying to adjust it left and right and using collimation live on the screen with bright stars and then doing test frames and seeing if one side is flat or not. I'd say just strap it up as tight as you can, and if you notice anything thereafter, then play with one of the screws. But I've had the best result doing that. This is an interesting issue with Hyperstar, and not one we consider a lot, but overexposure. This is a 1-second exposure of M42. Now, admittedly, it's on high gain because I was just pushing this ZWO 174 mm, you know, how much I can get out of a very small exposure in Hyperstar. Overexposed already in the core. So this sort of exposure sort of lends itself to video, live video of deep space objects, which is fantastic. It's not a color camera, but you know, I was so impressed. I just went through and thought, well, I'm just going to take 100 frames of each channel in O3 and sulfur and hydrogen alpha, and they were great. So overexposure is actually an issue with Hyperstar, especially when you're doing these bright objects. You do need to consider, are you going too far? Because if you're doing a 1-minute exposure in Hyperstar, that's a good exposure if you were shooting at f10. So I have learned to actually dial it back a bit. I was doing 5-minute exposures for a long time there. I've dialed it back to about 3 minutes on most stuff. And I'll probably dial that back up again if I'm doing something especially dim, like a sharpless object or something like that. But overexposure is an issue. Into the next issue I find with Hyperstar, which is the star density and the color. Because of the quickness of the lens, frame, and this one's a 3-minute frame, and it's collecting so much light that the stars really blow out really quickly, and it becomes very difficult to see the difference between the orange stars and the blue stars. So it's great for doing these deep exposures, but you might have to consider stuff and maybe taking shorter exposure runs for star color and then merge that later with your deep nebulosity exposures as well. But this frame does give you a sense. This is just a single frame, a single Hyperstar frame. And for a single frame camera, I think it's pretty cool. All I've done here is color calibrated it. So I've removed the green atmospheric hue, but that's the way it comes out. It's really quite impressive. Now, this next one's so impressive for a single frame. It's quite soft, as you can see, but I just wanted to highlight a particular issue with Hyperstar, which is the primary mirror reflection. So you'll see Alnitak, which is the bane of our existence in this region. The reflection of the primary mirror at the back of the telescope. And I've got a dew shield on here as well. So instead of being a perfect circle, you get a kind of edge to it, like a pointy edge on one side of the circle. So you have to make sure your dew shield is also perfectly aligned as well, so you're not getting a weird shape on the really bright stars. It's not a huge problem on anything else, but if you've got one big star in your image, a Schmidt-Cassegrain problem, then purely a Hyperstar one. But the Hyperstar really does, because you are taking these exposures which would normally be massively long exposures, and those bright stars just really blow out quickly. The thing about the Hyperstars, because it's on the front, you will see your cable show up as patterning on the diffraction spikes or in the image of the primary reflection at the back. Some people like to their cables at 45-degree angles, so they'll put the power cable running straight down and the USB cable running perpendicular to the side, just to make their diffraction spikes look a little bit more like traditional spikes at 90-degree angles. I don't really mind so much. I think the human eye has natural diffraction spikes because of the way the back of our eyes work and because of the obstructions that we have in front of our eyes, which are eyelashes. So if we look at the sun or we look at bright things, we see these sort of natural kind of flary diffraction spikes. But diffraction spikes are usually a controversial issue, obviously, and different people like different things. But if you are using Hyperstar, this is the kind of diffraction spike you're going to get on the bright stuff, and you can only tame it a little bit with how you place your cables. So the next issue with Hyperstar is the price, and especially if you're going down the narrowband path. You know, a Hyperstar lens is I think about $1,000 now. But I might be thinking about the Australian conversion with shipping, but it's not cheap. And then you start getting into the actual filters themselves. The filter draw system pictured here actually come with the lens, so you've got to spend a little bit extra to get this draw system. It's not mechanical, it's not automated, which is not a big deal when you're using Hyperstar. Things are really quick anyway. But you pop these filters out and you can get multiple draws, so you don't have to screw them back in again. And it's kind of essential, I would say. I'd really recommend springing for it. The aren't just your regular filters. You do need special high-speed filters and 2-inch ones, especially if you're using a large chip, of course. But they're about $400 US a pop, so pretty quickly. I would argue that you do save a lot in the long run just because of the time factor. I mean, 25 times faster means you can knock out multiple images a night, and so you have to weigh up that saving in time versus how much you spend on the actual system itself. The other issue is the footprint of what you're putting at the front of the system. Now I'm using a QHY12 camera, which is shaped like a beer can. So you can see down the tube here. It sits really nicely. It's flush. It's a cylinder, just like in the same basic size as the secondary mirror and the Hyperstar lens. So it really doesn't obstruct anything at all. It's the cables themselves that obstruct anything. But you have to think, like, if you already have a big camera, it's in a big square, there is no way that that's going to sit at the front of a Hyperstar system nicely. You're just going to be blocking too much light, and all your stars are going to go uneven.
Dylan? We have got a couple questions already, and before you get too far ahead, I'm going to call them right out. The first question from you guys back, do you have to recollimate each time you reinsert the Hyperstar?
That's a good question. Essentially, no. The way that they've designed the back of the holder for the secondary mirror, it's got a little screw in there, which means it goes back in the exact same way each time. So no, it doesn't affect the collimation. That said, I would probably tune it up anyway, or just check at least to make sure it's not out. But I've found in my experience it doesn't affect it much at all.
And excuse me, the other question is, what is a high-speed filter? How does it increase speed?
Sorry, high-speed filter is probably a weird name for it. Beta have released the filters which are specifically for f2 imaging, because when a small part of that spectrum out, that's tuned to the average speed of, or the f number of your telescope. So when you go down to f2, or the part of the spectrum that it's trying to cut actually shifts a little bit. So what they've done is they've created these filters which shift it back so that you're actually getting the right part of the hydrogen alpha spectrum, or getting the right part of the O3 spectrum. I hope that makes sense.
But that's those high speeds are only for narrowband.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so what they're saying is that the filter shift that we've all been warned about when we buy narrowband filters, we've been told it really only affects you when you're using really fast optics. What they're saying is you're using really fast optics with the Hyperstar, so now it really applies. So you have to have these filters which have shifted the bandpass a little bit so that we actually get the bandpass we're looking for.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. That's what high speed means. Okay, cool.
Yep. Are there any more questions?
Yes. Does mirror flop change collimation?
Primary mirror at the back of the OTA, changing the collimation. Well, just as much as it would normally, really, which is not much at all. All the collimation issue that I've had has been to do with how the chip sits at the front and the sag that you get on the camera itself.
It is a spherical mirror, so assuming the mirror flop isn't bad, I wouldn't expect to have much of an issue. I think this is one of those mirror flop doesn't really tend to be such a bad thing with SCTs unless the mirror is loose for one reason or another, and it's usually on like older scopes or scopes that have been around the block for a few years.
And the Edge series has the mirror locks as well, where you can lock the mirror in so you don't get that flop affecting you so much.
Next question, how is the focusing with that speed? The critical focus zone is probably very thin. Can it be automated?
All right, that leads me to the next slide perfectly. Awesome. The next issue is focusing. The focal plane is extremely shallow and fiddly. I don't use a motorized focuser, and every time I've researched it to find out how I can, I'm really limited to this one product, because it's not like those focusers that you can put at the back of your image train and it just changes the back focal distance. It literally has to twiddle the knob, just like I do when I'm sitting out there in the dark. I have found it fiddly. I've sat there sometimes and gone down with the full width half maximum reading on my screen and seen it go down, seen it go up, and tried to pick that focus point. then gone back inside and been imaging for half an hour, and then checked the images, and they were just that little bit off. So I do think it is a little bit of an issue, and it can be frustrating sometimes, but when you do get it right on, it's pretty good. That said, it is still a Schmidt-Casa grain with a big tube that is affected by temperature differentials as well. So especially in Australia, we have these hot days, and then it cools down pretty quick at night. So I find myself refocusing at least once every half an hour, sometimes more. Focusing is definitely one of those issues with Hyperstar. Were there any other questions in the queue there before we keep going?
You're all caught up.
So the next slide is about the benefits. Fast imaging means you can complete an image in minutes or hours. Especially before I had the observatory in the backyard, I just set up here by the washing line and knock over an image in a night, which was fantastic. We're not all set up with observatories, or sometimes we're traveling somewhere to get an image, so it is satisfying to at least have a result at the end of a night, or at the end of a camping trip. You know, you come back with 4 or 5 images because you've been able to knock out a few every couple of hours, especially with a color camera. It's ideal for people whose children jump on your face at 5 a.m. in the morning. I know a few people in the channel will understand what I mean by that. When your time is limited, you do want to get to bed by midnight or 1 a.m. just because you know you have to pay back that sleep debt the next day. Surveys, such as comet hunting. I know comet hunters here in Australia who are using the Hyperstar, and there's even a video on YouTube from David Levy of Shoemaker Levy talking about using Hyperstar. Because you do get such a wide field and you do take such a deep exposure at f2, it's great for locating those faint smudges in the sky, which I do with software and blinking visually and stuff like that. People like me who want to save their marriage by reserving time for your significant other, with Hyperstar you can, you know, dedicate an hour or two and do a quick image, and instead of sitting there doing our long image runs in mono at 6.3 or f10 even, sitting there and pretending to watch the movie, we're actually looking at our phone or checking the remote session to make sure everything's still working and we're not snagging anything during a meridian flip. So I'm sure my wife appreciates that I'm spending, you know, a reasonable amount of time on astronomy rather than dragging it on for months on one image. The wide field that Hyperstar gives you does reduce mosaicing, so actually putting several panels of the images together for those wide targets. It's I found with my particular setup at 540 millimeters, you do get most of the big objects in really nicely. Orion and the Running Man sit next to each other really nicely. The Lagoon Nebula and its neighbors, although you can put the Trifid in there as well with a second panel. But if you do just want to take a nice wide image, it's sort of perfect for that. Parties when you do just want to get stuff over quickly. So my dual I was showing before, I've got the Hyperstar on the front there, but I've got my planetary set up on the back. So I've got the PowerMate and the filter wheel and the ZWO camera, and I can leave that set up. It almost acts as a so that I can do my Hyperstar, take that Hyperstar lens off and put the secondary mirror back in again, and I'm good to go for the planetary, which is really convenient. It does put quite a bit of weight on the payload though, so you want to make sure your mount is okay with all of that. Configuration. What I like about Hyperstar is that I can do that. I can just change between things. I can use the Hyperstar if I want to. I can go back to f10 if I want to, or more if I'm doing planetary and putting in magnifiers. I can put a reducer in at the back and go down to 6.3 if I feel like it. So this single telescope offers me a really wide range of different fields of view, and the Hyperstar one really works. It's probably a bit forgiving for beginners, and that was good for me out, and I couldn't really get my head around the fine drift alignment, the polar alignment, stuff like that. And even for people with fork mounts and old azimuth mounts, some people are doing imaging where the image rotates, but because they're only doing a quick series of 15 or 30-second exposures, they can kind of get away with it. And as we mentioned before, it does not affect the collimation of the main scope when you're swapping the secondary in and out. And And it's got a pretty good resale value as well. You'll see Hyperstar rigs popping up on cloudy nights or ice in space now and then. And people rebuy them. They're actually pretty good for that resale value if that's what you're into. But they are built for one particular scope. So your Hyperstar is, my Hyperstar is for my Edge 9.25, and so I can only sell it to someone else who has that exact same model. And you do want to make sure that the model that you have is compatible. So it'll say FastStar compatible on the front of the secondary mirror. And if it doesn't say that, it's not actually going to take that Hyperstar lens. The benefit, of course, with Hyperstar is just being able to do lots and lots. This is me in the last year. And I've had a kid in the last year, so I shouldn't have this much work under my belt. But it just allows me to go out, spend a couple of hours, take a few images, then come back in and be a good dad again. So just that, it's great for stamp collecting. If you're a stamp collector like me and you just want to knock over target after target, probably not doing them justice, but a bit of stuff on your chip, it's great. So here are a few of mine. This is, you know what this is, I don't need to tell you guys, but it's Hyperstar. Forget the exact exposures. It was layered, so I did a few at shorter exposures and a few at wider exposures. You can see my star color isn't fantastic, which is what I was talking about before, and the overexposure with Hyperstar. But the aim for this particular image was trying to get the dust detail out. So doing those really deep exposures. So it works really well for this target. If that's what you're going for. You can see those diffraction spikes there, as I was talking about with the cables. Because I lay them straight down, you end up with the horizontal cables, whereas if the diffraction spikes, if I'd laid one of the cables perpendicular, I would have probably got a nice 4 spike diffraction spike there. This is one of our big objects here in Southern Hemisphere, Eta Carina, and I've done a fair bit of star reduction on this. But I think the overall time that it took to gather this was probably 2 hours. So, I mean, it's a big, bright target, obviously, but it goes to show you what you can get done in 2 hours with a Hyperstar lens. One is Andromeda, but this is Andromeda from my place in Australia. So we can sort of barely see this. It was about 18 to 20 degrees on the horizon, so we don't get the color that you guys do. And I didn't have a lot of time to do it. Like it was only up between those 2 degrees in an hour and a half. So I just had to do some really quick exposures, and I was happy to get any kind of result in the dust lanes there at all. Sent some data to David Alt, who's in the room as well. And I actually sent him the wrong data, which was, I thought I was sending him Hyperstar data and I accidentally sent him this, which is not Hyperstar data. This is with the 6.3 reducer. But it worked out really well, and David was really gracious, and he did a Hyperstar one as well. And what we ended up with was the ability to show you the same target through the same scope with the same exposure time and the same number of exposures with and without Hyperstar. So this is the Lagoon Nebula, which David's processed for me. I had a little bit of trouble with coma in the edge here, but Lagoons are quite a bright target, 3-minute exposure. We have quite a bit of detail around the edges, and it's quite tight in the field of view. The very same one with Hyperstar looks like this. You can see it's a much deeper exposure, a huge number of extra stars. You can see the whole region because the field of view is just so much wider. In the lagoon itself, the amount of detail that's there is just amazing. So if I go back to that 6 out Hyperstar, 6.3, f6.3, and now I'll go to with Hyperstar, you can just see how much of a deeper exposure that is. So that's not 25 times, I think it's like 7 or 8 times the amount equivalent. So I'm just about finished. There's one more thing I'd like to touch on. The RASA product from Celestron. Dedicated OTA now for this kind of stuff, for F2 imaging. It's the Rowe Ackerman Schmidt Astrograph, which is 11 inches. It's convenient because you've just got one thing. You don't have to attach another lens or anything like that. So it's just sort of pick up and go. Good for star parties. You can use the same filter draw system that I showed you before with filter draw system. It's got a little magnetic clip. It's really nice to use. It's not mechanical. It's not automated, but it does work really well. As far as I know, it only comes in one consumer version, which has a field of view of about 620 millimeters. But I believe that there's a 14-inch research grade one as well. 52 millimeter usable diameter supports full frame and larger chips, which I'm not sure is the case with the Hyperstar. I'm using an APS-C size sensor, and that's okay. But I think with a full frame, you would get more severe vignetting with a Hyperstar system. So this one might be a better option if you do have a full frame camera. It does have an internal fan, an actual electric fan. I've accidentally put cooking of the OCA, but I should have said cooling, but sort of same diff here right now. It's summer in Australia and my OCA definitely cooks in the observatory. Ultimately, it is cheaper than the Hyperstar setup, where you have to spring for everything, including the lens and the draw system and everything else. You do still need to buy the draw system separately here, but you don't have to buy the lens and the scope. But it is pretty expensive for a scope that you can't change the focal length on. It is fixed. So it's sort of dedicated for that one focal length. It doesn't have that convenience that I was talking about before, about being able to change between different setups. And the other thing, which is probably worthwhile noting if you have to go out and buy one, is that it doesn't have an eyepiece. So if you're a visual astronomer, you expect to take it to a star party, it's not like a Dob. You can't go and do your high-speed imaging with an eyepiece. There is no eyepiece at all. This is just for astrophotographers. So that's me, really. Any other questions?
One question popped up. I would think Crayfords can't be used since you need the mirror itself to be moved. Maybe attach Rigel stepper to the focus knob itself. So I guess the question is focus knob focusing only, correct?
Yeah, I was told that I had to upgrade the focus knob that I have that came stock with the Edge HD to the Crayford Feather Touch, and only then I could attach the micro USB stuff. But I don't know a lot about it because I haven't actually done it. And that's the 11-inch RASA there, by the way, behind me. So I've got one. So I should be able to do a comprehensive review eventually.
How about flats? How do you take flats?
Yep. So flats can be quite difficult. You can't use like the T-shirt method or anything like that. You've got this thing sticking at the front of your scope, so you can't just whack a light box on the front of it. The only way to do it is using the sky. So waiting for sundown and trying to get that average pixel depth to what, 20 to 40,000, and just take. I've found it quite problematic actually. You can, you know, when you're taking sky flats, the sky is always changing, so I'm constantly reviewing the image info and the pixel stats and trying to make sure that I'm hitting them right, and then having to calibrate that. But yeah, I haven't a lot of experience with flats, but the way to do it with Hyperstar is sky flats.
Great. Next question. Someone wants to know what kind of guitars are on the wall.
This is my baby, my Gibson Les Paul.
Ooh.
And and yeah, I've got a Gibson Epiphone as well, and the other one's just a copy because I need a bass. But there are I've noticed a lot of you guys have guitars in the background giving presentations in the room, so between us we could probably start a band or something.
I have one in my other room, but I'm not that good at playing it.
I'd also like to say thank you as well to David Alt for whipping up those images, because my processing's okay. I can get an image out, but for him to take what he knows about processing and do it to the Hyperstar data that I have really gave the opportunity for those two images to be properly compared.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun.
So I have
Good.
one more question. So the first image was at 6.3. So at, I don't know what, 1400 millimeter focal length. And then the second one was at 500 millimeter focal length, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
When you zoom in, how do you find the difference in resolution between the two? Because theoretically, it should be very similar. So you should be able to zoom way into the Hyperstar and get a very similar looking image, with the exception of however the pixels, how pixelated it you get. But
zooming into the Hyperstar image was actually really good. I'll see if I can do it for you now. Let me see if I can screen share the original. Yeah. And you can see that now. You seeing that? Okay. So, and has that zoomed in a bit now?
Yep.
Okay, so that's at 50%, like 100%. And that's probably a better way of seeing just how clean the data turned out after David's processing. It's really quite nice.
It is. Yeah, you really do get the resolution you'd expect to get out of 8 inches of aperture. I think that's the real benefit.
I think the only drawback there when I was processing it was that a lot of the stars are blown out, right? So especially in the regions where there's just thousands and thousands of stars there, it's difficult to differentiate them and actually get star detection to catch them. And it's difficult to get the color to show up properly, right? So there's a little bit of a processing challenge in that respect, especially in fields where the star field is extremely dense.
Yeah, you've done a better job than I ever do.
Somebody is asking, when you have the Hyperstar on the scope, what happens with the eyepiece? They saw a picture that you had a CCD attached.
My eyepiece hasn't been out of its case for about a year. On the back of the rear cell, sometimes I just leave the planetary or the f6.3 image train set back there. Usually I just because I take the CCD off, put it at the front of the telescope, and then just leave a cap on the back of the rear cell. But the other thing to remember as well is you don't want all the stuff that's hanging off the rear cell to crash into your tripod if you're starting meridian flip. I actually start so that I don't have to do a meridian flip. I sort of start with everything upside down, so it tracks the meridian, and I don't have to flip it. And you've got to just be careful that if you do leave stuff on your rear cell, it's not going to hit the tripod.
Yeah, because with the Hyperstar, you're completely bypassing that light path. So
yep,
it's almost irrelevant what's on the back of it, assuming you don't smash it into your...
Yeah, and I should probably mention, because you do have all that weight at the front of the scope, you do need to balance the scope based on that and balance it so it's swinging around that way, not your balance where you're taking the whole counterweight across. So rebalance the top of the scope and then balance with your counterweight after that.
Comment, with the newer CMOS cameras, the sublengths can go even shorter with this setup. The QSI 1600, maybe QHY 1600, unless QSI is used. I don't think so, I'm not sure. Even has a Hyperstar friendly profile.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, that was one comment I was going to make. The newer cameras that are coming out, smaller pixels, smaller profiles, really would work well with Hyperstar. So as the new cameras come out, even RGB, dare I say it, it's fast enough that you're going to pick up that data and that signal. So future-proof, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, and I used color images in the examples that I did, but obviously you can still do your narrowband, you can still do your mono stuff, and it's still quicker because you're still taking those shorter exposures, and it's even quicker with mono because mono has such better quantum efficiency in the first place. So I could have probably even done those similar sort of things with the Lagoon if I was doing it in mono in 1 minute exposures rather than 3 minute exposures with the mono camera.
Yeah, so John Mills, so I understand the downside of Hyperstar saturating the star colors. If you shoot mono, would that be a way of controlling that? And I think that's kind of what we were touching on.
Yeah, it is definitely an issue, and yeah, I think I've read in many places that people are doing shorter exposures just in general, just to get the star color, but I guess you have to do a fair bit of masking and recombining to make that work.
Yeah, I'd have to assume that at that speed, read noise would be almost irrelevant with any reasonable exposure. So basically, stacking lots and lots of very short exposures would, in theory, work. At the expense of just a little bit more storage space. Does anyone know what's the reason of RASA using a primary focal position approach instead of a Newtonian configuration?
I think it's just, I'm not sure what Celestron's going for with this product, but it seems to be like a very kind of, I mean, it's a dedicated scope for this f2 stuff. I think it's really for people that just want to set up and go and not have to worry about all the other stuff that we normally worry about. And I see Celestron trying to go in this direction with the new mount stuff. They're trying to simplify things for beginner astrophotographers as well. So maybe it's just part of that, just this one OTA that just does this one thing that you can stick a camera on, basically.
One of the things you might want to consider as far as trying to make a Newtonian focus is the size of the secondary you'd have to have. If you've got a f2 mirror, it's got a really, really wide light cone, which means that by the time it got back up to where the secondary is, it's got to, if you've got a 11-inch mirror, it's got to go 5.5 inches just to get to the outside of the tube. And then if you want to put a focus there or even have an edge off the side of the tube, it's going to be even further away. So you're going to have a really, really big secondary if you want to do that. Granted, some of our cameras are really big, so they already form a big obstruction. But that's probably one of the reasons why they don't want to go with that configuration.
Yeah, because if you look at the Riccardi Hondas, they have massive secondaries, and they're very fast. They're very, very expensive, but and the camera doesn't come off the side. The light path actually drops back down through the center, so you're mounting the camera in what I'll call the normal place. But they have very large secondaries.
If you look at any of the really good imaging Newtonians, like the Dream Scopes or something like that, you'll notice the secondary is huge, right? It has to be, like Alex said, to capture all the light cone and get it to the outside.
Yeah, John Mills' comment, it seems like mixing RGB with H alpha would be way cool for deep imaging. I agree.
Yeah, hello there, John. John and I are friends, and we have actually collaborated on images before. And one thing that has been really good is I've been able to use my Hyperstar RGB data to just get stuff really quickly, and then mix it with his stuff. And he's using a completely different setup and just doing the HA stuff with mono for me, and mix those two together. And it can be good for knocking over an image quickly as well. Just do your mono HA, do your RGB, and just combine them together, and Hyperstar makes that really quick.
Any issues with weird shadows with the DSLR?
To be honest, I've never used the DSLR with the Hyperstar, just because people do it, obviously, and as you saw in the presentation before, there was a DSLR in the front of the RASA, but the DSLRs have that really big profile, right? It's a really big square, whereas I don't have one here, but the profile of my CCD camera is more like that. It's quite cylindrical. So when it's sitting on the back of the Hyperstar, it's kind of not much of an obstruction at all. It's just coming out there. Whereas a DSLR camera would be this big square at the back of it, blocking off a whole lot more light, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of the f2 stuff. But people do it, and yeah, I'm not sure if it would cast shadows so much as just drop the overall light input.
Yeah, I've seen people make a mask, like a circular mask, when they're using a DSLR, but yeah, you are cutting down on the light. So you're going to lose photons that way. But if you're really critical about those shadows, it's a fix for it at the expense of losing some of that light. How about cable management? Is tangled cables, etc.?
I would be scared to let you guys into my observatory to see my cable management because it really just involves me sitting under the scope with a beer and making sure nothing catches anything else.
Another comment, yeah, sounds like a good situation for a DSLR that can communicate wirelessly. Battery issues, but then again, if you're acquiring the images so fast, battery might last you 3-4 hours. So
yeah, true. No, that would be interesting.
Hey, Dylan.
Yo, Toga.
Hey, how are you? What about
Good, mate. How are you?
like many stars? Like, do you have to be selective with like star sizes in your field of view? Like, what if you have like a pretty bright star? Does it go nuts on you?
Well, the image that I showed before with Alnitak, that was probably the best example because Alnitak near the horse head, you know, Hyperstar is great for pulling out the horse head because it's such a sort of faint or borders on faint anyway. So it's good to have the f2 imaging to draw out that faintness. But yeah, Alnitak really does go nuts and it's flary. You get, and the flares so much don't worry me. The actual spikes, they're kind of pretty looking. It's that big primary mirror. You get this big halo around Alnitak, and that's probably where this kind of imaging really suffers. But I'm not sure that is, as I was saying before, I'm not sure it's a Hyperstar issue as so much as an SCT issue and just the construction of the telescope. But it becomes an issue because Hyperstar is so quickly and you're doing such a long exposure with this that halo becomes a real issue.
Usually halos like that are filter related, dealing with the filters having reflections that go back through the system, especially with narrowband systems, because they're reflecting so much of the light. But it is certainly an interaction with the f2 system, right? So
yeah. So if I try that horse head, for example, again, and have no filter whatsoever, not even like an L filter, that should reduce the haloing. Do you think, David?
I would think it would actually, yes.
I don't know.
It just like, do you see the halos when you do broadband filters, or just with the narrowbands?
Well, when I'm doing straight RGB, I usually leave the UHC filter in, the ultra high contrast in. So I'm just wondering if I pull that out and just leave the filter drawer empty entirely, maybe that will help.
Yeah, I mean there can be reflections in reducers, and effectively the Hyperstar is a big one system, so I wouldn't necessarily guarantee it, but yeah, I would definitely try it and see.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
I like John Mill's comment. It's an Alnitak issue, which I completely agree with.
We all have that issue.
Yeah. They put that star in just a terrible place, right near the horse head, and Orion in the same field. It just, yeah. Yep. And he's also commenting as a percentage in regards to probably the mask, as a percentage of light path blocked, it's probably not much of an issue considering the speed of the data you're collecting, which is, again, a good point. And probably why, even with the Riccardi Honders, which I'll say that the Hyperstar is, or even the RASA is probably I don't want to say a poor man's Riccardi Honders, but it's Riccardi Honders that people can afford.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I can buy that.
So go on, Alex.
It doesn't when you're using that fast f2 SCT mirror or something like that, you are gathering a lot more light a lot more quickly and stuff like that. So I agree with John that as a percentage of the light path blocked, it doesn't matter much. But wouldn't it have an effect on a contrast? There's an awful lot of surfaces causing diffraction if you've got a really big central obstruction. And you could have some, depending on the shape of your camera, some really weird diffraction patterns coming through. So we aren't as worried about that in imaging as we are in visual, because we could just take our software and do a lot to the contrast. But it may be an issue to consider.
Yeah, Alex, I think you're exactly right with the last statement you made. Because we're doing photographic stuff, the contrast reduction is not really that important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you treat it as I've lost additional light, right? So I'm not getting the flux that I would normally be getting.
Awesome presentation.
Thanks. I will say that Hyperstar is often pitched to beginners as a kind of way to buy your way out of having to learn too much, because you can whack it on a CPC or something like that and just run 30-second exposures and get a result, which is good. But I've really been enjoying actually pushing that more, and so still using my Hyperstar, but getting into the narrowband stuff, doing mosaics, doing paneled images, and doing five-minute exposures, which would be the equivalent of almost like an hour 20 exposure at f10. So once you do get your head around polar alignment and having accurate tracking and stuff like that, the Hyperstar can be used to great effect for that deep wide field stuff.
Hey, Dylan, have you looked at how this balances out with like download times? Right, like if you calculate, your download time off your CCD in how much time you've actually spent out there under the sky, relative to say an f6.3, have you done anything looking to see if there's where the trade-off point is?
Oh, I haven't calculated that, but I'm pretty sure I would be divorced if I was looking at the output that I've had in the last year and trying to calculate what the equivalent amount of time would be if I was imaging that at 6.3 or f10. I am a really lazy astronomer, and I will go out there and sometimes do 3 targets in one night. And admittedly, it might take me 2 or 3 nights to redo each one or do the HA in each one. But I just try and knock them out really quickly. Now, that'll change once my stamp collection gets big enough, and then I'm like, well, I might go back and do this one properly. But I'd be really interested to know if I went back through my folders and looked at all the Hyperstar ones and tried to calculate them and how much time it would have taken. God, it would be massive, I would assume.
Well, the reason I ask is because some of our the CCD cameras, not the newer CMOS stuff, but the CCD cameras have long download times, right? So if you're doing a whole bunch of 30-second exposures or something like that, and your download time's 30 seconds, half of your time is actually spent capturing, right? So really you're only, maybe you're 25x, but really you're only 12x in terms of your total light gathering, right? So there is,
that's exactly right. Yep, it is actually quite annoying when you're doing really short exposures, 30 seconds, and it takes a minute to just download that 30-second exposure in the first place. So there is a trade-off point. I understand what you're saying now.
Yeah, so yeah, at least for people that are doing straight broadband stuff, they're probably going to saturate pretty quickly, due to light pollution and things like that. So Hyperstar may or may not be the best solution for them simply because of things like that. But they'd have to figure out based on their situation whether it'd be a benefit or not.
David, did you see this question in chat? I'm trying to run this one through my mind. Do you think drizzle processing would be a good option for Hyperstar images to recover some resolution, since this probably will be oversampled for most cameras?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't do it on Dylan's data because he just gave me the raw stack stuff, right? But there is actually a resolution loss in in the data when I compare it to the F10 stuff, right? But you know, if you take that and you drizzle all of it, then absolutely you can recover a lot of that, because your virtual image presented to the CCD still has all the resolution of the 8-inch aperture, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just a matter of your pixels being a little bit too big.
Yeah, you just have to keep in mind that when you're doing that, you are losing signal to noise ratio, so you're kind of partially negating some of the benefits of doing the Hyperstar in that fashion anyway.
That's good. Now I've got to go back and redo everything.
And you're probably getting enough subs that Drizzle would give you a nice benefit.
Yeah.
Oh, so John is a fellow Australian?
Yes, he is.
Gotcha. Because I guess he's using binoculars, and I thought it was, John, I thought it was you that was knocking the visual guys. Yeah, it was. Yeah, not much visual for me. My kids keep on saying the same thing. I want to look through the telescope, and I say, I'm sorry, guys, I don't want to take the camera off the telescope.
Right, and destroy my flat so you can.
Exactly. Exactly. Awesome presentation. Oh, yeah, what's an eyepiece exactly? I should mention next week's presentation is going to be on itelescopes.net. Adam Landefeld, who's I think won a few of our Image of the Weeks, is going to be on next week to chat about that for a little bit. And think about that in advance in case you have any questions. Besides that, I don't know, Dylan. First of all, thanks a lot for jumping in and saying, hey, I've got some stuff, I could put it together. We do rely on some of our other people, some of our other viewers, and I don't know, I get sick of hearing myself talk, so I can imagine you guys must.
Oh, Adam, could I just point out that last week we were looking for presenters and Dylan volunteered, and there are undoubtedly other people out there who can volunteer. We need you to volunteer. Dylan did a great presentation for us this afternoon for you, I think, Dylan, right? You know, you can do it too. It's not that hard to sit there and talk to your buddies about the things you love to do. And so I really want to encourage people to help volunteer on stuff like that.
Thanks, Alex. Yep. And thanks again, Dylan, one more time. Thanks, David, for your contributions to this. And I think rather than going on forever, I'll end the session, but say tune back in next week, and we'll learn a little bit about eye telescopes. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much. See ya.